Hi, I'm Will Webb, and this is Why You Should Watch. In this episode, we're discussing Howard Hawks' 1959 film, Rio Bravo.
There'll never be another like Rio Bravo, with its thundering story of raw courage against overwhelming odds, and its once-in-a-lifetime combination of today's hottest star names. You've seen nothing like them together, and here at Rio Bravo, nothing can tear them apart.
In this classic western, a stubborn small-town sheriff rounds up a posse, including the town drunk, a young stranger, and a disabled old man, to keep a criminal in jail and away from the reach of his ruthless rancher brother. Joining me for this conversation is Will DiGravio, a video essayist and podcaster who brings a very special expertise in Rio Bravo to the table. Listen to our chat to find out more. Hi Will, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you so much. Great to be here and excited to talk Rio Bravo. Excellent summary.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's an interesting film to summarize, isn't it? Because so much of it is actually short on plot, I think. There's not much plot to the film. Not many things happen, which is a real surprise for a thing as commercial as the Western. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you about your background and kind of how you come to film. And the biggest thing that I know about you is that you run the Video Essay Podcast, which is this in what I think is quite a niche subject sometimes, the world of making video essays. And it's specifically for making video essays, or at least talking about them in ways that are related to the making of them. If you could tell me about how you came to that and what kind of brought you to video essay or videographic criticism, as I've newly discovered it's called.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's great to be here. And I occupy a weird space in the video essay world because I think I'm more associated, people may be considering more as an interviewer and podcaster than an actual video essayist, although I am trying to make more and more video essays. The short story is I went to a school called Middlebury College to get my undergraduate degree, which is in the United States in Vermont. It's a small liberal arts college. And there the idea behind the liberal arts college system is that you're not really supposed to know what you want to study when you go in. They force you to take a bunch of different classes. And so I started off as a political science major and taking some econ classes. Did terrible in econ, like the worst grades I ever got. Kind of got bored with the political science and was like, maybe I want to be an English major deep down, because I started to develop this interest in journalism. So I was like, okay, maybe I should try and become like a better writer. I liked a lot of the classes I took, but then because of the liberal arts, you have to take something in the arts. So I was like, oh, okay, I like movies. Let me take a film class. And then it's kind of like, boom, my world changed. First screening was Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, and I kind of just like sat there with my mouth open, just like, wow, this is like the best thing I've ever seen. I want to keep doing this. And from there, it was kind of off to the races. I was very lucky to study under Jason Mattel and Christian Keithley, which, if you're familiar with video essays, and particularly academic audiovisual essay, are two leaders in the field. And they run this program for scholars where they essentially train them how to make video essays. Because you can imagine a scholar who's been in the field 20 years, knows a lot about film, can write eloquently about film or TV or whatever moving image, but might not know how to use Adobe Premiere, which is obviously one of the most important things when you're making a video essay. And so then they teach those skills while also advocating for the form itself in the field. And so I was actually working as a journalist at a local newspaper in the town of Middlebury, and Jason invited me to cover this for the newspaper because it was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities here in the United States, the workshop. So it's kind of a big deal in a small town with 8,000 people in Vermont, right? So I went and covered it and was kind of like, whoa, this is really cool. So I enrolled in Jason's class the following fall, fell in love with it, was like, you know what, I'm interested in media, I'm interested in film. I'm just going to become a film major. And I actually started off declaring a major in film and media because I was interested in, like I said, in journalism. I thought, maybe I'll write something on like conservative television or something like that. But then I just started watching these amazing movies. I discovered Hitchcock. I discovered, I said Spike Lee and experimental works like Maya Deren. And I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm a film studies guy. So that's kind of my origin story. But, growing up, I never really watched a lot of movies. It just wasn't something that I did or my family did, not in a bad way. It's just, people watch and do certain things. And so I have a lot of gaps in my movie watching, and I've been working to fill them for a while. But I did stumble across Rio Bravo at one point, which was very, serendipitous. And perhaps we can touch on that later. But yeah, so for me, ever since 2017, it's been just about trying to engage myself in film studies, and videographic criticism I found exciting because it seemed kind of like an untapped terrain. In wanting to think about films and to do film criticism, you watch something like an amazing movie for the first time and you're like, oh my God, I'm so excited about this. I want to work with it and do something. And then you go to the library or you go online and there's 100 articles written about it and 10 books. And you're like, but maybe there's no video essays made. And you think, oh, well, this is my way that I can contribute something new, and be fresh and to revisit old films in new ways, which is my passion. And so that's what got me really excited about videographic criticism. Then the more I kept watching, it was just clear that there was an art to this and that we should be treating video essays in the same way. I really love those books that are like conversations with filmmakers or experimental filmmakers. Sure.
Like Lynch on Lynch or something.
Yes, exactly. And I was like, there should be something like that for video essayists, because I was seeing style across the works of video essayists. And so then that was the inspiration for the podcast. And now here we are today.
I mean, it's a very familiar story to me in some ways, because like you, I went to university to do a philosophy degree. And although I was making films, I hadn't ever really done any film criticism. And I did a course that was essentially you just had to write an extended piece on a film or a set of films, which ended up being on Dario Argento and interpreting how he feels about women through his Giallo films. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic. And I was lucky, like you're saying, about at the time, there wasn't much critical stuff about Giallo that was serious. There was stuff in the liner notes of DVDs, and the Blu-ray revolution was just starting to get all those kind of exploitation films. There's a lot of movies that skipped straight over even getting a VHS, let alone a DVD, and went straight to Blu-ray, because places like Alamo's Releasing House and Arrow as well in the UK kind of got these little films and put them straight into a restoration with a rescan. So that was kind of the moment where I got into film criticism as well as filmmaking too. And I think you're right that it's we're at a kind of inflection point for video essays in a way, because the technology is now available, pretty easy to use. Premiere's relatively cheap, at least when you compare it to, like, say, an Avid video deck from the early noughties or something. And what it means as well is that it's freeing up people who are not academic video essayists to become video essayists. And I love that there's this like incredibly rich and very stiff sometimes world of academic video essays. Some of my favorites are from there, and some of my favorite video essayists are those people who play at like Rotterdam in the selection there and stuff like that. But I think the proliferation of video essays online really focuses on very mainstream films and TV. And that's really heartening to me, because the main thing I want from criticism is to encourage people to think deeply about and probe into culture, no matter what it is that they're engaging with. And so when I see like a 9-hour long video essay series on like Studio Ghibli or something like that, or anime in general, it's like, great, I can't wait to find out what you think about this thing that I'm never going to watch. There's that iconic 2-hour long pathologic video essay in the H. Bomber Guy kind of canon, which comes up a lot in those conversations. And again, like, punishingly difficult Russian video game that I will never play, but they're out there talking about how great it is and what it means for video game design, stuff like that, which is fab. And I love that you have a focus on older films as well, because I think when we talk about Rio Bravo, we are talking about a very commercial film. It's a genre-focused film, although Howard Hawks is I would say, a very strong filmmaker, and certainly was at this point already recognized by people like Cahiers de Cinema, the kind of inventor of the French New Wave. He's one of their favorites, right? This is a very commercial film, even down to casting not one but two singers as these lead characters, because we have Dean Martin as Dude, and is it Ricky Nelson? Is that his name? Yeah, this kind of teen heartthrob country singer. And so there's this attempt to make something that's very commercial but with a real strong artistic sensibility. And my understanding of it is that it's largely a response to another Western, right? Which is High Noon. I should preface this by saying I know very little about Westerns. And in fact, I hadn't seen Rio Bravo, so thanks for recommending it. High Noon is a film about a sheriff who's in a similar situation and who is kind of convinced by by the people around him to kind of take on their help. And as far as I understand it, John Wayne and the director of this film, Howard Hawks, felt that a professional sheriff would absolutely not bring citizens into the line of danger like that. And so this film is largely engaged in how he doesn't want to take on help and why that's a bad idea. Although, funny enough, he does end up taking on several people who really aren't good fits, and then it just happens to work out. So the magic of film for you there.
Yeah, I think Hawks referred to the sheriff in High Noon is Gary Cooper, who plays the sheriff Will Kane. I think he referred to him as a chicken without a head running around. And for him, the one of the main problems was that, you know, a manly man, a true sheriff, would not go around groveling for help in that way. Because in that film, Gary Cooper, these bad guys are basically coming back to get their revenge. And he's running around being like, can you help me? I need your help. Da, 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 da. And they're all kind of like, no, no, no. And so John Wayne and Howard Hawks didn't like that. So there is definitely some of that at play in Rio Bravo for sure.
And then away from that kind of like their call and response kind of element of the film, it's also a return to form for both director and star, right? John Wayne had built this kind of inexorable image of himself as John Wayne, the cowboy, and kind of got a reputation for playing himself. I think an unfair one. I think he is actually quite a strong actor, as you see in this film. But he went off and tried to do a number of films that played with his image, I guess, that had him doing very different things, and they mostly sucked, or at least they bombed. And Howard Hawks, likewise, had a long period of not making films, at least a long period for him. I think it was 4 years, which by modern standards isn't bad at all. I think Terrence Malick usually takes about 8 between each film.
Yeah.
But he was a very commercial filmmaker, and Westerns also were being churned out at this time in history.
Yeah, it's funny. The film he directed for this is Land of the Pharaohs, which is considered a huge flop. And he takes some time off, and he was already, you know, people associate Hawks with the Western a lot, but he didn't direct a ton of Westerns, as, you know, compared to maybe someone like John Ford. And he goes abroad to Europe, I'm forgetting where, and he's watching a lot of American Westerns on television and is kind of taking a lot of that in, and, you know, then eventually decides to reunite with Wayne, as you say, and do this. And I remember in Roger Ebert's has that great collection of books, The Great Movies, where he writes, you know, about different great movies, and he begins the one on Rio Bravo with this great anecdote that before the first day of shooting, Hawks went behind the set and vomited. He was so nervous because he had been waiting so long to return and just didn't know if he had it in him. And then he goes out and directs my pick for the greatest movie of all time, if I had to pick one.
And he also fired a relatively well-known supporting actor, who's again a name I can't remember, because he referred to him as Howard instead of Mr. Hawks. And he felt that was kind of like an affront to him. So I think tensions were relatively high when they started shooting, for sure. And the other thing we should mention about this before we talk a little more about it is that you are currently doing a sort of research program around Rio Bravo, which is the Rio Bravo Diary. So this is you splitting the film up into roughly 365 roughly equal size parts and posting them once a day onto Twitter, and they're talking about them. They're kind of picking out these little elements, as well as I've seen you've done a number of kind of more experimental video essays or re-representations, I suppose, of the film itself through your website, the riobravo.diary.com. And I love that. I think you're about 2/3 of the way through now, right? You're at Chance kind of being proud of Dude for not taking a drink.
Yes. I think we're at the final day will be November 1st of this year. So if we do, I think I just did day in the 260s or so. Yeah, and it came, you know, we might get to how I first discovered Rio Bravo later, but it came in that first video essay course I took. I wanted to work with Rio Bravo and to do something about the film because I knew that I loved that movie up until that point, and I wanted to work with it. But the thing about videographic criticism is you get such an intimate relationship with your object of study. You're literally in Premiere playing it apart, confronted with it every day. And I realized that I couldn't make a video essay about it yet. It was just too personal for me to do. I felt overwhelmed because I wanted to just do the film justice. You know, I think there's a great responsibility that comes with working with a film that you love in that way. And so this is me kind of returning to that and thinking, how can I get to know this film in the most intimate, drawn out way? And I thought, okay, I will watch the film over the course of 1 year, which is what I've done. And each day I log on to Twitter, and in no more than the length of a single tweet, I annotate a roughly 23-second clip, because that's how the math works out, of the film. And I haven't watched it in full since I started this project. So it's been,
wow, okay.
And I hadn't watched it in a while before starting the project. So I probably haven't seen it in a year or two. And that was part of the goals of the project, where I said, I'm not going to watch it in full. and it's been really great. And I like the medium of Twitter because it limits me. I can't write long paragraphs. I have to stick to the character limit. And it's also been great because people can respond, they can follow along, they can engage.
And I suppose it's a longitudinal study as well, right? Because you're laying it out one by one every day. So there's really time to stop and think about what it feels like. And I'd noticed that like week to week, there's a theme almost to the stuff that you post because they're all from one scene usually. You're going to get through about a 2-minute chunk every 10 days. So that's a scene roughly. And it means there's like a real focus. Like you went for a whole period talking about the gender politics of it because you had a whole section of love interest scene with John Wayne and Angie Dickinson, which was like, really interesting.
Yeah. And what's great is it's not me picking random scenes. It's going sequential, through the film. And so I just go in Premiere and I take the next 23 seconds and the next 23 seconds. So sometimes at pivotal moments in the film, that it will cut. Like that will be where the cut is, and perhaps it's in a gesture that's very important, or in the middle of a line of dialogue, or And what's great is that has forced me to view those scenes in new ways, because I think sometimes when we watch a film and we know that there's a scene of great significance, we kind of assume that's the only way to look at it, or at least I do. And sometimes we turn off and we only see it in that way. And by this kind of cutting it up and manipulating it in this way, it's given me a lot of insight. And it's also, it's a lot of fun. And I can't believe it's almost over. So, but yeah.
Next one. My last thing to mention just before we start talking about it is I was really fascinated to find out that the writer of Rio Bravo is Lee Brackett, who is a woman, despite the kind of like gender neutral name, who I know better as like a sci-fi writer. She wrote The Empire Strikes Back. That was her last film. She wrote the original draft of it. And she also wrote a very good sci-fi novel in the 50s, about 3 years before this, called The Long Tomorrow, which is about nuclear war and Cold War paranoia and all that stuff. And it's just like interesting to bear in mind when we talk about this film as like largely being about a couple of guys working out what it means to be a guy in the West for them, and kind of finding dignity. I think that's a big theme of the film. And yet to think that it's written by a woman, which apparently was a surprise to Howard Hawks as well when he first met her.
But Brackett also worked with Hawks on his earlier film with the Big Sleep, which is the great film with Humphrey Bogart.
And maybe that was the one that they met and he was surprised then.
Yeah.
So you touched on it a little bit, but let's kick off the discussion about Rio Bravo by talking about where you first got to see it. And I'm wondering if you sought it out. Was it presented to you by accident? That kind of thing?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I wrote this long introductory essay to the diary, which you can find at the website you generously plugged. But essentially in high school, I grew up in not a super conservative area of the United States, but a conservative area within a liberal area of the United States. I am now a proud socialist and leftist and what have you. So I'll qualify there. But I was, 14 and thought of myself as a Republican. And so one day, I remember this day vividly. It was raining, and I just decided to go on YouTube. And before YouTube became such an integrated facet of my life, and just watched Ronald Reagan debate videos, and which sounds like the lamest thing of all time because it is. But then this video popped up. Ronald Reagan roasts Frank Sinatra. I was like, what? What? I was confused. I was like, there's going to be some weird compilation thing. And that was my introduction to the Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts, which, if you don't know, were this great celebrity roast show that ran in the 1970s, mostly, that was hosted by Dean Martin, who was in Rio Bravo. And at that point was kind of in the later years of his career, and after been an accomplished comedian, actor, singer. And they're really great, and they're kind of all the A-listers of classical Hollywood on there. I mean, anyone you can think of is on there. And I sort of fell in love with that world. And so before I had an interest in film, I think I more had an interest in comedy, and was really interested in people, and I still am, in people like, Don Rickles or Jack Benny, or that, those early forms of comedy, Nipsey Russell, Phyllis Diller, so many great comedians on those programs. And so I really fell in love with the music of the time period. Without getting too personal, I had been dealing with a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety in high school. And I found that, especially late at night when I had trouble sleeping or whatever, like Sinatra and Dean Martin's music really relaxed me. And so I developed this love for them, and I felt like I needed something to kind of mellow me out, and that's what worked. So I just kind of went with it. And so in the process of doing that, I would sometimes seek out movies more so to kind of deepen my relationship with the musicians or the comedians, and less so out of an interest in cinema. So the first time I watched Rio Bravo, I didn't know who Howard Hawks was. Like, it didn't even occur to me to look at who the director was on the film. Like, and so I was actually in what store? I think I was in like a Best Buy or some type of store like that, and saw one of those DVDs that has 4 movies in one. And it was this pack of John Wayne Westerns. And The Searchers was on it. I think it was The Cowboys, Fort Apache, and Rio Bravo. And I bought it.
That's about right. There's always 2 bad ones and 2 good ones.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So,
exactly. And so I was like, oh, like I know John Wayne from these roasts, so I should probably watch a couple John Wayne movies. Not knowing that The Searchers holds this incredible status in American cinema. But I'll buy that, and Dean Martin's in it, so that's like a 2 for 1. That's perfect. And so I watched, and then I remember one night I was home alone. My family was out or whatever, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll just watch a movie. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll watch this. And I just picked Rio Bravo of the 4 because of Dean Martin, and was just kind of blown away. I didn't know what to make of it, but I had this visceral reaction to it where I was like, I love this. And it was unclear if I loved it because Dean Martin is brilliant in the film, and I'm my love of Dean Martin aside, he's objectively brilliant in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just really loved it. And I was like, I think this is my favorite movie. And I kind of just kept watching it. And then it wasn't until I arrived at Middlebury and started studying film that I realized that there was this love for it among many film theorists. I have in front of me, this is Robin Wood's book for the BFI on Rio Bravo, who Robin Wood, to anyone familiar with film studies, is a leading theorist and critic, and has called it, if he had to pick his favorite film, this would be it. And kept encountering it in different places. When I went into Christian Keithley's office at Middlebury for the first time, he had a poster of Rio Bravo on the wall, and I was like, oh my God, and so then it allowed me to rediscover my love for it and to actually work through it. So it's very personal for me, the relationship with this film, and it's just reemerged at different periods of my life that are very important, and so I feel this connection to it, and getting to rewatch it and rework with it has been amazing.
In that introductory essay, I think you're talking about another critic who referred to it as the sacred text. Is that right? Is that
yes.
Talking about Rio Bravo there?
Yes, this is David Bordwell, who, again, is probably the leading American film theorist, or one of them, wrote this great essay for his blog called The Sacred Text, in which he's talking about Rio Bravo. And the film has this very interesting place in the canon. I think it's absolutely in the canon, but obviously lists are ultimately dumb. But when you look at lists of like the American Film Institute's top 100 movies or the top 10 westerns, or I think Rio Bravo is not even on the New York Times list of 1,001 movies to see before you die. Right. Like in certain lists, like it's forgotten. But meanwhile, on the Sight and Sound list, I think it's in the 60s, like it's in the top 100 in the 60s, and has the endorsement of Robin Wood and David Bordwell. And in the essay, I talk about talking with Catherine Grant, who people know Katie's work in the video essay community, and saying to her Rio Bravo, and her being like, "Oh, I love Rio Bravo." So it's this film that, it's funny. I feel like people either, when I bring it up, are either like, "Oh my God, love it, amazing," or they're like, "Oh, I haven't heard of it." Like it's this weird pull. And then there are obviously American film directors like John Carpenter and Quentin Tarantino who love the film. So discovering that was great. Yeah.
When you mentioned the sacred text, it reminded me of a Christian Bible reading technique where you select a chapter and then a verse and then a sentence and then a word. of the Bible, and you talk about what it meant in that context, how you felt about it. And the Rio Bravo diary, weirdly to me, does the same thing with Rio Bravo, where you're disassembling stuff into accidental sequences of shots, not directly as they were to be presented. And although they're in order and they are the shots that were shown, what you're doing is kind of picking out and just talking about these individual things on their own merits and their own moments, which is a really interesting videographic exercise. So to lay out the plot a bit more to those who are listening, we open with Dean Martin coming into this bar, very drunk, and being offered $1 to pay for some food. It might even be to pay for some booze. It might be a quarter, actually. I'm not sure about currencies this time. And he gets chucked into a spittoon. When he's bending down to pick it up, he accidentally gets the ire of Joe Burdett, who's the guy who chucks this stuff at him. Chance comes in. This is John Wayne's character. There's a kind of an altercation, and Dude, who is Dean Martin's character, ends up basically siding with Chance, and they get hold of Joe Burdett because Joe Burdett just killed a man. And so this whole sequence unfolds basically without any dialogue whatsoever. It's about 4 minutes from the start of the credits without any dialogue. And it's not like a showy thing. It's just that the whole scene is taking place in a register of language that doesn't need dialogue. And it's a self-conscious kind of homage to silent film, as I understand it, from Hawks. And it's a just truly fantastic opening. Sometimes I go back to watch older genre or commercial films and I find that they've aged quite badly, where pacing has transformed so much over the course of the last 50, 60 years. And yet in this, it's like immediately attention grabbing. And the example for me when I always think about like an older film that does the same thing is Night of the Hunter, which I think also feels very modern in terms of how it approaches stuff. And the big surprise, if you've seen any Westerns, which it's not my favorite genre, it's not the thing where I know the most about it, but I've seen kind of all the spaghetti Westerns, which are a little removed from this. They start about 5 years after this, and they're much more like this than they are like the majority of the rest of the Westerns. And there's also movies like The Searchers and Shane, which is one of my favorites, actually. This is a very character-focused Western, much more so than a plot-focused one. And so the majority of the film's runtime is spent either in the jail in the town, where these 4 guys are just kind of hanging out, talking to each other, which is to say Stumpy, the young Colorado, Dude, and Chance, or they're in the hotel where there is Feathers. She's not actually named, I don't think, directly in the film, but Feathers is Angie Dickinson, who is this young, beguiling woman who's shown up on the stagecoach and may or may not be a card shark. And she, slightly inexplicably to the modern eye, is falling in love with John Wayne because she's half his age. And that was something that was remarked upon at the time as well, I believe. And the other kind of inhabitants of the hotel are, again, 2 characters who would be slightly offensive now. These quite stereotypical Hispanic characters. Brave and kind and good characters, but very stereotypically presented. And you can't really explain the plot of it any much more than that. I mean, obviously there's a shootout at the end, but that's 2 hours after the film starts. And most of it is just them having conversations. What struck me about the way that worked was that it meant that those little moments of violence that happen, these shootings that kind of pepper the film, really slap you in the face. They're a huge statement in the middle of an otherwise like a chamber piece kind of Western. And that felt very modern in terms of how that was paced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's, a couple things. One, in this language is very like, white American centric, but the way Hawks thought about the Western genre is that there were 2 kinds of Westerns. He thought that one was as the West was being won and settled. That might be something like his first great Western, which is Red River, or The Searchers. And then there's after the establishment of quote unquote law and order. And so Rio Bravo falls more into this post Law and Order Western, where there aren't these wide landscape shots that we might expect in the Western, or there aren't great sequences where John Wayne is chasing someone on horseback. Like the only time people are on horse really is to go up and down this one street in the town. And actually feels kind of silly that they're even using their horse to do that, because they could just walk 5 minutes or so. And as you say, it really is contained to what I've come to describe in working on this diary as almost a domestic kind of space. Like the relations between all the characters feel very much like a family dynamic. Of course, there's, Chance and Feathers will probably end up together. Dude and Chance have this kind of weird relationship where they're almost brothers, but sometimes they have a father-son type of dynamic. They have this love between them. And so, as you say, it's these conversations that are so important, but it's not a dialogue-heavy film, as you can find in that opening sequence, which begins this great opening shot of dude. He opens the back door to the saloon, and he just kind of slides through it, like he kind of peers through. And you think of Dean Martin, this great celebrity at that time who was a couple of years removed from working with Jerry Lewis in one of the great comedy duos in American history. And here he is, this gross, disgusting, dirty guy, sliding through it. And it's just mesmerizing in the way it begins.
It's an immensely rich performance from him.
Yeah.
And in that opening moment, you don't really know anything about him. And there's kind of this looseness. You don't know what he's going to do next or anything like that.
Right.
I think that's a tremendously difficult thing to do as an actor.
Yeah, and it's confusing because as you had already said, he gets this gold piece, and then Chance comes in and looks on him with disgust, and then dude actually attacks Chance before they reunite to get the bad guy. And so it's very confusing to know who's on who what are the teams here? Who does everyone support?
Reappears kind of wearing a sheriff's badge about a scene later, and suddenly you're like, wait, that was the guy who hit the sheriff.
Yeah, right. And there's this, and you never question at any point, because in the way that Hawks uses the camera, which is subtle, in these great matches between characters where they exchange these glances or these gestures or these sly smiles or whatever, you get the sense of this deep shared history between the characters, which is what I think of most when I associate with Rio Bravo, without having to be told most of it. I mean, we get drops of the history throughout, but Hawks doesn't need to tell us that. There doesn't need to be this huge backstory because we feel it viscerally. And it's this loving thing in Western clothes. And it has some cliches of the Western, but I think they're deliberate in their use, as you say, with the violence. Or there's one great scene where they're walking down the town in like one of those big, oh my God, what is it called? The big, the tumbleweed, a tumbleweed comes and just like hits them like in the middle of the street, like in a very like in your face type manner. And it almost seems like it's Hawks just playing around with the Western genre by saying, I just had to pick one genre, but that's not what this film is about, truly.
Yeah, and it's also quite a tender film sometimes. So I was interested, because I have in my head an image of John Wayne that's like this very stereotypical cowboy. I mean, he is, a stereotypical cowboy, right? That's where our image for it comes from, him and Clint Eastwood. And yet he's often joking around. There's a lot of humor with him. There's a scene early on where he finds Carlos, the guy who runs the hotel, who's bought these red lace bloomers for his wife. And he holds them up. He unfolds them and holds them up to John Wayne to see how they look. And then John Wayne's love interest walks in. First time we've seen her, she's this thoroughly modern woman. And she kind of makes a joke about him not looking good in them. And it's a joke fully at John Wayne's expense. And yet it's, in the middle of this famous John Wayne cowboy performance. And like you were saying, that's partly to do with the shared bond these men obviously have that is often unspoken. I noticed that they all have their own ways of relating to each other. They steal cigarettes off each other while they're making them. And in one particularly iconic moment, Chance actually kisses Stumpy, the old man, on the head, and then Stumpy smacks him on the bum with a broom. And that feels like a very niche moment for John Wayne. I don't know how many times that happened for him in his career, but it does come across as really lived and tender.
Yeah. I think any, I think a lot of the ways that we view John Wayne are obviously very fair, and, his image and pop culture. So I'm not trying to rewrite history here, but I think if you're familiar with John Wayne at all and you watch his film, it will challenge how your preconceived notions of him. The running joke throughout the film is that, the two great performances in Rio Bravo. I mean, John Wayne delivers a very strong performance in this, and he's great, but it's Dean Martin as Dude and Angie Dickinson as Feathers. Angie Dickinson is fantastic.
Yeah.
The running joke throughout the film is essentially that John Wayne, if he's not a virgin, he is very inexperienced when it comes to sex. And Angie Dickinson is this. She outwits him. They have wordplay, and she always gets the better of him, as you say. She is the confident one. She's the one who puts the moves on him, who calls out his BS, and he's the one who doesn't know what to make of it. I think in this very, toxically masculine way, but also in this very tender way where he just secretly wants to just, he has convinced himself that he needs to dedicate himself to this fight against the bad guys, and he can't be kissing feathers in the hotel at night. But he also just doesn't know what to do. And as you say, Dude will often make fun of him because the reason for Dude's alcoholism, and we don't get the details, is that he suffered some kind of heartbreak. He ran off with a girl and now he's back and he's poor. And so Dude, it's interesting because Chance is kind of the mentor figure to Dude in the film and trying to help him get back on his feet, telling him he can do it, he can be the deputy again. But then we have Dude who has this experience with women, and Dude kind of is just like, be like, spent a lot of time at the hotel last night or something like that to John Wayne. And it's very encouraging and loving in the way that he does it. Like, it's all in good fun. But, it's not this confident, cocky John Wayne. And as you say, he refuses to take help, and he's infuriating in this because he just gets by the skin of his teeth all the time. It's not that he's cunning and super smart. It's just that he's lucky that his pals come through for him just by the skin of their teeth in the right moment.
Yeah, I mean, the only time that he initiates anything with Feathers is the time when they consummate their relationship. And I have to assume that's more to do with 1950s sexual mores than it is to do with the actual character.
Right.
Again, of course, we don't actually see that. It's just implied, but it's all there. Right. It's all in the text.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too that although John Wayne is the name that for me always comes up with this film, the real lead is Dude. He's the character who changes the most over the course of the movie. He's the emotional core of it. And we do get this very strong performance that takes us from Dude being a guy trying to get coins out of a spittoon to this sharpshooting kind of action style figure who's clean shaven and singing his way around the town at the end of the film. And it works because Dean Martin puts his all into it. And I've got to be frank, I mean, I've only seen Martin in comedy roles and singing, and it was just wild to me that was kind of in the tank for him. I can't say the same about Ricky Nelson, who I've got to say is pretty rough. I don't know if the Coen brothers based in Hail Caesar, there's that character who just cannot deliver lines.
Oh,
I don't know if he's based on Ricky Nelson, but he's also like this teen Western star who's been put into a bigger movie. And so the director copes with it by giving him very little to do, which apparently is what Hawks did in this film. Although I think the stuff that he gets, I mean, it's not like a bad performance. It's just way outclassed and overshadowed by the other two.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is part of the story, I suppose. And they all get a chance to sing as well, nicely.
Yeah.
Near the end. And again, this was something that I think contemporary critics didn't like, whereas it comes across now as quite nice.
Oh, yeah. It's
Dean
great.
Martin and Ricky Nelson get a whole song together. And Stumpy joins in on the second one too.
Yeah, and so... Dean Martin was a couple years removed from his relationship with Jerry Lewis at this time, and that relationship ended with Dean being this tremendous talent. I mean, I think Dean Martin considered himself an entertainer, which I think is a very, when you actually think of it, that's just such a beautiful thing, because he doesn't say singer or actor. He said he wanted people to think of him as a damn good entertainer, and so he could do it all, right? And I think as far as multi-faceted, multi-talented performers, Dean Martin is at the top of the list, I think.
Absolutely.
And, at this point, he's trying to kind of make a name for himself, because even though he had this tremendous success, it was viewed as Jerry Lewis was the genius behind the pair. And when he was auditioning for the role of Dude, he was like an hour or so late to the meeting with Hawks. And Hawks said, "Why are you late?" He said, "I got here as soon as I could. I performed last night until 2 a.m. in Vegas and took a private plane to get here to meet with you." And Hawks said, "You have the role." That's kind of the type of thing I think Hawks, appreciated in Dude. And there's this one point, Todd McCarthy also has a great biography of Hawks where I'm drawing a lot of this information off of as well. And John Wayne's just kind of like, it becomes clear at some point on set that Dude, as you say, is the main character in this film. Even though Dean Martin doesn't get top billing. And John Wayne kind of asks about this, and I think he's maybe a little unsure of how to play this role because he's the lead, but he's not the focus. Which is, and
it's weird. He's technically, I think, the protagonist, I would say, in the sense that he is actually, the story revolves around Chance, but the emotional core of the film and the actual character journey that takes place in it is Dude's.
Right.
Weirdly, the only other example I can think of that is Avatar: The Last Airbender, the TV show, where Aang is provoking the action of the story, but Zuko is the lead of the story.
Yeah. And It's why my roommates are actually rewatching that right now.
Right.
And Hawk says something to the effect of, just think about it. He's your best friend. He's your best friend, and he's going through this right now, and you need to be there for him. And so that's why this tenderness is so palpable in it. And Dean is just incredible. And it also relates to his star image at that time was one associated with alcoholism and being drunk, and particularly in the later years in Dean Martin roast years, like it's all about him drinking and boozing and what have you. And so here, the function that alcohol plays is so crucial in the way that he overcomes it, but not in a way that feels like it still honors the struggle of alcoholism. Like it doesn't diminish it or make him seem superhuman for overcoming it. In fact, it's just as likely that he could relapse 20 minutes after the film is end than when it begins, and it's really about this contained moment, this scenario, and what's getting him through it, which is his friendship, his determination to prove himself. He wants to get better. He wants to be better. We feel that struggle. He's not trying to overcome his alcoholism to prove it to anyone but himself. There are times of tough love where Chance will say, go back to the bottle, get drunk, go ahead. And he ultimately doesn't.
And I think one of the best kind of action-y moments of the film revolves around that battle, that emotional battle in a way, which is they have to raid the saloon where they know a killer has gone in, and Chance gives Dude the option of going in the front. And he's like, I'm not sure if I can trust you, but you're going to do it. He goes in, tries to assert his authority, does a relatively good job of it, and then they start to make jokes at him because he used to be the town drunk. And someone chucks a coin and a spittoon for him for a drink. And he rallies, he stops the killer, and at the end of the sequence, when the guys are being carted off, Chance stops him and says, "Are you sure there's not anything else you want to do?" And he grabs the guy. He basically gets the guy who put the coin in the spittoon and gets him to get the coin out.
Yeah.
And it's this lovely moment of writing where it's really simple. It's really plain stuff. And it's like a plain talking movie, I guess. So it makes sense in that context. But yeah, as you say, that's John Wayne playing the mate of Dean Martin fundamentally more than anything else.
Right. And just as you're saying that now, it's making me think about it. And the fact that Chance is the one who suggests that, it shows that Dude is not out for revenge, right? That's not what motivates him. He's just happy that he got through the moment and that he did it, and that he proved himself to Chance, and also, proved to himself that he could do it. It's very touching.
And I guess we see a lot of Westerns that are about proving yourself as a man by killing a bunch of baddies. And in this, although that happens, the real focus of proving yourself to be, this guy again, having your honor back, your dignity, I kept saying in my notes, it's more about picking something and following through on it and helping people through that, which I think is a much more tender thing. Yeah, it's weirdly like quite a vulnerable film sometimes. It's just mental by the feelings, really. Yeah. And like also maybe a good template for managers. I feel like if you have a bad manager at work, you send them this and say, look, Chance is a very good manager. You could learn a lot from him.
Yeah.
He's very firm, but he's very fair. He's quite tender, but he's also, strict.
Yeah, yeah.
At this point, I usually ask that you pick out. So if you were to recommend this movie to somebody who'd never seen it before, and I know, for instance, that Tarantino says if he's dating someone, then they have to watch this movie, and if they don't like it, then he stops going out immediately, which I think is maybe a bit much, but I know you're a fan of the film, and you must come across people in this context where they haven't seen it. As you were saying, it's a film that people often haven't watched. And somehow it's gotten out of that classics list and into the sort of like good Westerns list, which I think is a little different. Mm-hmm. So if you were to recommend this film to someone who's never seen it, doesn't know anything about Westerns maybe, what scene or particular moment do you think you would pick out to recommend to someone watching? Where can they get a taste of the film?
There's this, I think perhaps my favorite scene, and I hope no one holds me to this because I reserve the right to
it doesn't have to be definitive,
to change my mind, is there's this moment when the film has these series of moments where Dude is nearing relapse, about to relapse. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. And Chance kind of enters in to intervene. And there's this point fairly early on, I'd say maybe towards the end of the first third of the film. My perspective on where things are is so off because of the diary. Where dude is sitting, it's late at night, and he's sitting in the chair, and he's got the shakes, and he's sweating, and he at one point even hits his leg because he's just trying to like not drink, don't drink. And Stumpy, who is played by Walter Brennan, who's the third deputy, who he walks with a limp, and he remains in the jail to kind of guard the prisoner while Chance and Dude do the rounds. Dude is relapsing, and John Wayne and Stumpy just exchange these series of glances to one another. They don't say anything because Dude is right there in this tiny little room with them. But you know everything that they're thinking and they're communicating. And Chance says, "Come on, Dude, let's take a stroll around the town."
Where'd you get these?
Bought them off the fella you sold them to.
I don't know how to...
Let's take a turn around the town. Get Stumpy his coffee.
Ain't you gonna tell me to get back in there?
No. Stay out here and get shot.
Yeah, I might do that just for spite. Might get a laugh out of you.
It's such a loving way to phrase it because he's doing it for Dude, but not making it about Dude, and more saying like, and even though Dude, you can see on Dude's face and his reckoning, like, thank you, like I need this, I need some fresh air, I need something to do to get my mind off the drink. And then they kind of just walk up this one street in the town, and it's dark and it's over dramatic. It's funny. Like at one point, like John Wayne like walks up to a guy and is just like, "Good evening," and they just exchange these glances, and you're waiting for the bad guy to come, and they're just slowly making their way to the hotel and moving it. And then there's these just series of matches where they're making eye contact with one another, and you just feel this deep connection, and it's suspenseful and fun and loving. And that's what I would watch. I don't know how you could watch that and not say, I need more of this.
Yeah, it's a tremendous sequence, and it's part of like the rhythm of the film, I think, as well, which is conversation in the jail, they go out to do something, it turns into something tense, and then there's this explosion of violence, and then it goes back to being this story about two men together. Yeah. And it does that again. My recommendation was essentially the same kind of rhythm, but it's the opening scene of the film, which is that 4-minute dialogue-free section that really sets up not just, I think, like the characters really well and how the film is going to roll out, but Hawks' approach to telling that story, which is... I noticed that you pick up a lot in the Rio Bravo diary how few close-ups there are. I think there's like 2 or 3 in the whole film. And instead, he almost always has either a wide or a 2-shot, or a 3-shot sometimes, where it's always picking out 2 people. So the whole film is relational. It's always about where people are and how they stand in relation to each other. And that all comes across in that first minute. And then also, I think there's an interesting thing where if people are finding this familiar to think about, then it might be because this film seems to have been endlessly remade and it's kind of entered pop cultural osmosis. It might be why we don't see so many recommendations for it, because there are, I think, 3 versions that were made by Howard Hawks and John Wayne. Wayne in the 3rd one apparently turns to Hawks and says, "Haven't I made this movie before?" kind of thing. There's also the very famous Assault on Precinct 13, which I did see as a teenager. It was one of the first movie I remember thinking, okay, this is really something. And Assault on Precinct 13 even has essentially the same climax, which is quite interesting. And then that was remade itself in 2004, I think, as District 13, which is a French kind of parkour-focused version of Rio Bravo, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, throughout Hawks's, this is one thing that's very interesting. In talking with, I've mentioned Christian Keithley several times, but in talking to him about this film, he has said that he's taught it in college courses, and that if he screens it on its own, students don't have a stronger reaction to it. I believe this is what he said, as if he prefaces it by screening other Hawks films first. Robin Wood in particular likens this film and relates it to another Hawks film, Only Angels Have Wings, which is one of his great films with Cary Grant, and To Have and Have Not, which is the great film with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and in his exploration of friendship and male dynamics and what they do for one another. And as you say, he recreates a version of this film in the West 2 more times, and one of them is actually quite good, El Dorado, in which Robert Mitchum, going back to The Night of the Hunter, plays kind of the Dean Martin character, and James Caan is a much more successful version of the Ricky Nelson character. It's funny you mentioned Night of the Hunter in this, because I think there's a lot of similarities between Robert Mitchum and Dean Martin. I also think they kind of look alike. Future project of mine, I'll tease here. But yeah, I think, and I think it also provides a template more generally for what you get with Tarantino. This idea of the Hangout movie is what he calls it. He calls this the great Hangout movie of all time. And I think we see, I honestly feel a lot of Rio Bravo in Jackie Brown of his films, just, more so than the Westerns, just in the way that the characters look at each other and interact. And
I mean, Jackie Brown is as close. I talk about this. I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but for me, Jackie Brown is like Tarantino making a good movie. It's like a generally good film, as opposed to like his weird fetishistic filmmaking normally, where he's like, I don't care if it's good, it's for me. And I think like Jackie Brown feels very classical in terms of the set pieces, because it's shot like hawks. It's always 2 shots, 1 shots, wides, but never like close-ups and stuff, unless it's close-ups of feet, which he loves. So there you go. And I had one other thing I wanted to drop, just because I never get a chance to talk about it, and I have always wanted to make a video essay about it, but have never been able to for obvious reasons. I'm a huge fan of the Beach Party movies. I don't know if you've ever seen those. They're like early 60s teen films. It's like the beginning of the teen film thing. It was the late 50s, right about now. One of the reasons why Rio Bravo has a teen lead in it. Yeah,
like Beach Blanket Bingo or
that's
something.
Exactly it. Yeah,
Don Rickles is in a couple of those, actually.
And what really gave me the thing with that is this section where they sing at the end of this movie, because all of the Beach Party films have to have like a singing section in them. It was almost their primary function. And for me, those are great hangout movies, because they have, an hour and a half worth of plot. It's very on the nose comedy that they know isn't even that funny. It's all just done like straight to camera. And it's almost all stunt casting. There's people from other movies playing versions of themselves. There's famous singers and dancers and stuff like that coming in. James Brown even shows up in one of the Beach Party movies. They're in the Alps. It's actually a snowy, like Alpine Lodge type thing. They're up in the Rockies, I think, doing skiing. And then James Brown comes in from the snow and it's like, whoa, I'm lost out there with my band, does a song and then leaves. It's absurd, but it's an interesting thing, because in that world, that feels perfectly right for that type of movie. And weirdly enough, I think the music in this feels perfect for how it works. It helps that there's a really important role that music plays in the plot of the film, where there's this kind of mournful mariachi tune that's played by the baddie, who only appears in one scene as well, which is a real wild thing. And so he pays these mariachis to play this song that they know has this connotation of like, we're going to kill you all, basically. And so them having this kind of joyful moment of coming together over their own music almost feels like a retort to it. And Stumpy actually plays his own version of the song as well. So that felt like a nice touch that was a lot more justified than those Beach Party movies, which, to be clear, very fun films, nowhere near as good as Rio Bravo.
Yes, and a lot has been written about the music in Rio Bravo and a defense of it, and I love it. And I think also, to your point, music is absolutely essential to the film. The DeGravio is the song that mariachi tune, and obviously films are. This is a film with stars, and Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson are stars, so naturally they have to sing. But also, I think what this film does is, if we think about it in relationship to High Noon, which I think is useful, but if anything, I think sometimes when we think of it as a response to High Noon, that is what somehow diminishes its status in a way. Yeah. Like I like to move it beyond High Noon, but of course you can't talk about Rio Bravo without at some point talking about High Noon. Yeah. But High Noon is all about, the High Noon is, there are shots back to a clock throughout that, because Gary Cooper is waiting for these bad guys to come. What's interesting about Rio Bravo is they already have the bad guy at the beginning of the film. So what they're waiting for is they're trying to hold off someone coming to take the bad guy. In this case, his brother is trying to get him out of jail. They're waiting for the marshal, which is Will Kane plays a marshal, but they're waiting for, like, I think a federal marshal in Rio Bravo. They're waiting for him to come. And so it's kind of the inverse in that respect, because they already have the bad guy, but both films are about, and they're kind of waiting, like and so they have to kind of pass the time. They have to, and this film is kind of about what happens in those in-between moments, what happens as you're waiting around, as you're waiting for the time to pass. And so it makes perfect sense that some sheriff's deputies might play some music and use that to pass the time and hang out with each other. And I think in a way, it challenges the masculinity of it, but maybe audiences at that time wouldn't have questioned it as much.
I think singing cowboys were kind of a thing anyway, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of Western stars that had that iconography.
Yeah, so I think it might maybe look a little weirder today to some people when they think about John Wayne.
Part of that is the sound mixing as well, I think, where they're very clearly dubbed. It hasn't really even changed the recording character of the music. Whereas nowadays, if you had a singing section of film, they would have done a live version for it in that kind of room and then dubbed that in. So I think that's kind of just a sensibility difference as well.
Yeah. And the film ends with Dean Martin, presumably, singing the lyrics to the song Rio Bravo, which he put out on albums. And, there's a great lyric. It's by the memory of a song while the Roland Rio Bravo rolls along. And so that's kind of the bow on which the film ends. And it's all about, our memories, our shared history, how that informs the present, and that is ultimately what is blocking Dude, is this memory of a girl in his past and how people have perceived him in the past. And so music runs throughout the film, and the singing sequence, and talking about sequences that you would recommend to people. I don't know if that would make people interested in watching the film, but it's one of my favorite sequences.
Yeah, it has a magic to it, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought about the role of memory in the film, but you're right, because of course the whole plotline for Feathers revolves around like an accidental attribution of identity that she's kind of coping with as well. And so in relation to Dude's storyline, where it's like an absolutely accurate portrayal of his identity up until that point, but he's trying to change, it's kind of an interesting thing. And then of course John Wayne just doing John Wayne, just stuck in the middle.
Right.
And there is that whole aspect of waiting to the film as well. There's almost like this Shaggy Dog side to the story, where I love that in the third act, right near the end of the film, they realize that they can't just have Joe go off to the marshals because they'll get killed because they're the witnesses to the crime. And then, so therefore the whole action of the film previous to that is moot, and they have to go and do something about it. They can't just wait. Great. Really interesting. That's it from me, but do you have anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to talk about?
I think I'll just say one last thing is, or two final things. This idea of waiting and memory in Feathers, also Angie Dickinson is, she has this ex-lover who was a gambler and in trouble with the law, and Feathers herself, we understand, has been in trouble with the law, and she was kind of passing through on the stage, waiting for the stage to come, but she decides to stay. And so we again have this idea of waiting and also trying to become something new and overcome a past version of ourselves and grow. And the other thing is that, the other thing that's often associated with the film is this notion of professionalism, of being good enough. And that's something that runs throughout. And, Pat Wheeler is a character who was killed, played by Ward Bond, who's another famous figure in Westerns from the period. He offers to help Chance, and Chance says, no, you're not good enough. Like, sorry. And the whole question is, Dude, is he going to be good enough? And so there's that. If there is a more toxically masculine side to the film, that kind of boils up at certain points. This refusal to take help, this challenging, this are you tough enough, good enough, blah blah blah. And I think that gets in Chance's way a lot. Yeah.
I'm almost not sure about how much of that we're supposed to take seriously as well, because ultimately, the end of the story, he only survives because he takes help from a whole bunch of people.
Exactly. Yeah.
He takes help from Carlos. He takes help from Stumpy. And I was waiting for Feathers to show up. If you made this film even 10 years later, it would have ended with Feathers joining the fight as well.
Yeah.
In some way or another. And so, I think if anything, the film almost proves High Noon's point to some extent, where it's like, well, yeah, you should absolutely accept help in certain contexts. But what a fascinating movie, and so rich for something that is so like on the surface of it has such a simple genre thing, these crooner stunt castings, but actually underneath is such a dense and rich film. Really wonderful.
Yeah.
Great recommendation. Thank you.
Yes, and I think it's not just that you should. I think it's not that you should accept help if it's offered, but you shouldn't go around groveling for it. I think is the
right. Yeah.
Is the yeah. So, and as you say, I don't think we are supposed to take it seriously. Chance is an infuriating figure, to say the least.
And it helps too, I think, that because it kind of ties into what we're saying about his performance as Chance, where Chance is like self-consciously this very strong masculine dude, and yet in a lot of places we see him being one-upped by women and by his mates in these kind of quips and stuff like that. So again, I don't think he's not as straightforward as the portrayal might appear at first.
Yes.
Well, we could talk about this all day, but we don't have all day.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Will.
Thank you for being here, and I would just encourage everyone to not only watch Rio Bravo, but to go and Google and the work of others, because there's been some truly wonderful things that have been written and said about this film that have informed my view of it, and much of what I've said here today. So there's a rich history that surrounds this film that you'll be rewarded. You'll be rewarded by watching the film itself, but then engaging with what's out there currently will only continue to offer future rewards. So, but thank you so much for having me and for giving me the platform to talk about it.
No worries, it's a pleasure. And do you have anything you want to plug while you're here as well? I know that the Rio Bravo Diary project is still ongoing. That's riobravodairy.com, and you can follow it at Rio Bravo Diary on Twitter.
Yes, that's correct. And my personal handle is just at Will DiGravio. And you can also check out the Video Essay Podcast and a recent podcast series that I have started in partnership with the Video Essay Podcast, which it's all just me. So it's not really a partnership, I guess. I'm just doing something else, is called On Your Screen. And it's highlighting notable film screenings and a lot of free stuff and just things that you might encounter on your screen on the web. So we've had episodes on the Essay Film Festival, which is in the UK, Monographs, which is a series on a video essay series on Asian cinema, and an episode on TikTok. So
yes,
with find all that at thevideoessay.com.
Thanks for watching this video. To hear more of our conversation, check out the indietrix podcast. Just search indietrix wherever you listen to podcasts to get started.